Welcome to Branding and Messaging for Your Store. I'm Annie Jones. I am so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm joined by my friend Adah Fitzgerald. I'm going to introduce her in just a minute, but I wanted to welcome all of you and give a big thank you to SEBA and to NABA for putting this programming on. I have been thrilled and grateful for all of the sessions I've gotten to attend. I'm impressed with the lack of technical difficulties, which is what makes me nervous about hosting virtual events. So thank you to SEBA and to NABA for such a well-organized, thoughtful, intentional event. It is my hope and Adah's hope that those of you who are attending today can walk away with some valuable information and practical tools for your store. Here's how today's format is going to go. Adah and I are kind of going to have a conversation about branding and messaging for my store, The Bookshelf, and for her store, Main Street Books in Davidson, North Carolina. We are going to reserve the last 20 or so minutes for questions. So if you have specific questions about branding or logistics or something we talk about kind of puts a bug in your ear, if you will put that question in the chat, all of your beautiful faces and microphones are on mute. And so if you will put your question in the chat, Adah will collect them and we will do questions at the end. So if you will all do that, we would be so grateful. And I'm looking forward to interacting with you through your questions, so don't hesitate to ask. Okay, I think that's all the business I wanted to take care of before we launch into this. So without further ado, let me introduce my co-host today, Adah Fitzgerald. Adah is the owner of Main Street Books in Davidson, North Carolina. Main Street Books has lived in the old general store on Main Street there since 1987. After 27 years, the owners, Betty and Barbara, retired in 2015, and Adah now carries the torch as the shop's proprietor. She is a Texan by birth and at heart, but Adah landed in town as a student at Davidson College in the 90s, and her path to Main Street Books included a decade of volunteer firefighter service, a biology degree from Davidson, and 13 years in science education, but there were always books. Adah is proud to be at the helm of a literary institution in a community with such avid and interesting readers. Adah, thank you for hosting with me today. I'm so grateful to not be by myself.
Well, I was delighted at the invitation because Annie Jones is, like kind of a big sister, because similarly, Annie Jones, if you all don't know, took over the Bookshelf in Thomasville, which was established long before she got there. She is a Tallahassee native, but she took over operations of the Bookshelf in 2013, and she and her husband Jordan moved to Thomasville along with that. And she is the just sort of adoring and attentive type of manager owner, and along with doing everything from leading story time and just hand selling her favorite books. She is also the host of the Bookshelf's weekly podcast, From the Front Porch, about books, small business, and life in the South. In 2016, Annie was featured as one of Southern Living Magazine's 50 Innovators Changing the South. And in 2019, she was selected as a member of the Booksellers Advisory Council for the American Booksellers Association. She's also been really involved with SEBA, and that is where she and I met. And I now call her a friend, which is a delight. All right, Annie, we are here to talk about branding and marketing, and we want to hear about what branding and marketing is to you. And what I mean by that is, like me, you own this small business with a shoestring budget, but have a big vision. So what is branding and marketing when you are on a shoestring budget, but you have big goals?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think for a lot of us, branding at least brings to mind, for me, immediate visions of aesthetically pleasing logos and beautiful marketing materials. And you and I both know now, through owning the shops that we own, that there is a monetary cost to those things. And so I think I learned pretty early that if I wanted to make changes or tweaks to the Bookshelf's identity or to their aesthetics, to the aesthetics of the store, that it was going to cost something. And so I think for me, branding has evolved to mean, yes, pretty logo, beautiful storefront, welcoming environment, but also translating that into online resources. I think in 2020, a lot of us, even folks like you and me who own small stores, are really having to expand our base to run our business as well. 2020 is requiring that of us. And so branding doesn't just mean a pretty logo, it also means an atmosphere, both in the store and then online. For me, it's very important that those be consistent. I think when I was looking at my notes for today, I thought, gosh, if the one thing I could get across is consistency in voice and consistency in appearance. I think consistency is the key word for me when I think about branding and marketing. And there is a way to do it on a shoestring budget. There really is. But it requires a little bit of DIY. It requires some stick-to-itiveness and really reaching out to your friends and your community and widening your circle to find people who are more talented than you, who can help you, who can help you with your vision.
Yeah, community care, like that is what these small businesses of ours are all about. And so I totally agree. Reaching out, absolutely. Yeah. So how did you? What is the voice of the bookshelf? How have you shaped that? And then how do we see that?
Yeah. So like you, I took over an existing store, and I know people come to independent bookselling. That's what's so great about our industry, I think, is people come to it from a wide range of career paths. And some of us took over existing stores. Some of us started stores from scratch. But I took over a store like you I took over in 2013, and the bookshelf already had a really, I think, strong brand. It was very clean aesthetics, lots of white space. I would call it very professional. And when I came on board, I was new to Thomasville. I'm originally from Tallahassee, as you said. And so I knew I liked the bookshelf's original branding, but I wanted to make sure people knew someone else had taken over. Like, that's the hard part about when you take over a store, is you're trying to establish yourself as the owner, particularly we're in a small town. And so I knew I wanted to keep the bookshelf's name the same. It's very recognizable in our community. I didn't want to take that away from people who had fallen in love with it 30 years ago. But I did change the logo. So I've got the logo up right now. The storefront has not really changed. It's the same. It has been for the last at least 10 to 12 years. But the bookshelf logo I tweaked. So the bottom half of the logo belonged to the store that I took over. And then the top half I created. And I think that's one thing I want you to know. You don't have to love this logo. That's totally fine. It won't hurt my feelings at all. But when I came on board and realized how much a logo costs and how much, and look, it's an art, so that's valuable. But I think I immediately was like, well, I'm going to do that myself, and I'm going to cut costs there. And so I used my very basic design background to tweak the logo, and then to kind of transform the store into what I hoped kept the white space, kept the openness that the store itself projects. We have really high ceilings, really organized open shelves, but add a touch of whimsy and welcomeness. Like, I just really wanted you to walk in the bookshelf and feel like you were at home. And so I think it's really important that when you are evaluating your store's branding, you think about what you want your store to say or what it's already saying to your community. So when I first looked at the bookshelf, great branding. It already had an awesome logo. It was beautiful on the inside. You can see remnants of it in this picture. Like, the Read, Relax, Explore was part of the original mission of the bookshelf. But I knew I wanted it to be welcoming and inviting and warm. And so the tweaks that I've added or the things that I've changed reflect that mission. I also think it's important to have a mission statement. I'm the kind of nerd who had a personal mission statement. And so for me, when I took over the bookshelf, it was important to evaluate the bookshelf's mission. The previous owners certainly had one. And I kept most of that original mission, but again, tweaked it to reflect what I desired for the store. And that goes back to warmth and whimsy and adding those elements into the mission statement as well. So I think it's important to look beyond the logo, look at the atmosphere of your store, look at what you want to project and what you are already projecting, and incorporate that into your branding.
I want to echo the mission statement. We were a little slow to do that, but having everyone on staff come together and do some work with, in our case, again, like reaching out to a friend who does this sort of thing and was willing to do that with us as a favor, has really helped us just nail down what is it that, why do we do this? And so we're kind of 5 years later beginning that journey, but
look, I think
it's important.
Yes. And I think the key, right, is better late than never. Like, I don't think it's ever
Absolutely.
too late to look at your mission statement and also to reevaluate your mission. What if the mission your store set 5 years ago isn't where you are today? And I think you made a good point. It's one I wrote in my notes too. Ask your staff. Ask yourself what you think your store represents, that you want it to represent. And without telling your staff, ask your staff what they think that the store represents, and maybe ask some trustworthy customers. Like, what do you think? What sense do you get when you come in my store? Like, what do we project to you, our customer? And I think really incorporating that and finding somebody maybe neutral, like you did, a neutral party to kind of help navigate you and your team through that process is really helpful.
Yeah, it just gives sort of direction and focus, because you can just find yourself like looking at all sorts of inspiration aesthetically and voice and, for all sorts of pieces, and end up with just a really scattered set of ideas, and coming back to this. Why am I doing this? Have I actually written it down? Do we all know together what we're on this journey towards? So I wholeheartedly echo that sentiment.
I think it's, I just want to interject and say, I think you bring up another point. So I think I'm going to talk a lot about consistency today. And I think the other thing is it's okay for your store to not do and be everything. Like, one thing I love about independent bookstores when I travel or when I talk to other store owners is every store is so different. And I think it's important to remember as you brand, because one of the things about branding is, or one of the processes about branding is, that you're constantly looking for ideas and you're looking for inspiration elsewhere. And I think that's really valuable, and you should do that. But don't get so overwhelmed by trying to be all things to all people. Like, it's okay for your store to have a really narrow focus, a narrow vision, to take ideas and utilize them in your own space, but also to say to yourself, oof, that idea, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but like, that idea or that platform doesn't work for my store. And that's okay. Not every social media platform is for every store. Not every aesthetic is for every store. So it's okay that your store maybe can have a narrow focus. We don't have to fit every niche, I guess.
So what are some of the, so in talking about branding, like, you come up with a brand, but then, how does anybody know anything about it? Right? How does anyone know who you are? How do they recognize you?
Yeah.
And I do, again, like, I think I often find myself just thinking branding, marketing, logo on everything.
Yeah.
But obviously it's so much more nuanced than that. So how does the bookshelf, what are some of the things that you've really invested in terms of sharing your voice, sharing your mission, sharing your brand with Thomasville and then beyond?
Yeah. So when we took over the bookshelf in 2013, something I tell a lot of people is Thomasville's a small town and the population hasn't changed in a very long time. And so when my husband and I took over the store, we knew that if we wanted the store to grow, the best way to do that might be to extend the boundaries of the bookshelf to be beyond Thomasville. So the first focus obviously is our town. We're a community bookstore. But very closely after that is the internet at large, or basically people who can identify with the bookshelf and with the values that we set. And so we have chosen to do that in a couple of different ways. The first way is with a podcast called From the Front Porch. You mentioned it at the beginning of our talk. I've got the From the Front Porch logo up. This is a new logo we did. I'm going to talk about kind of why we tweaked the logo this year. But From the Front Porch is our weekly podcast, and it gets its name from the spirit of the Southern Front Porch. Growing up, the front porch is something that my family really valued. It's where we had our tough conversations, or our long after dinner conversations. The porch to me means comfort and open dialogue. And that's what I want the bookshelf to represent. So From the Front Porch gets its name from that. And I hope you can see the spirit of the store, both in the podcast every week, but also in the store itself. So I want customers who experience us through their ears every week to, if they ever choose to visit the bookshelf, to walk in and not be confused. Like, I want it to be very consistent with what they've heard on the podcast. So the podcast is the first way we kind of thought, and originally thought, that it would be a great way to introduce this new vision of the bookshelf to Thomasville, but it did not fulfill that original intention. Thomasville did not really listen to From the Front Porch, especially for probably the first 3 years, and that's okay. My mom was a regular listener, and it grew from there. But we extended, I think, our openness and our welcoming attitude to readers at large. And so From the Front Porch is one main way we did that. The second way is by utilizing social media, which I know everybody is probably sick of hearing, or you'll hear about it later. I heard there's a session immediately following ours about social media in particular. So I won't go into like nitty-gritty details, but I will encourage people to think about what social media platforms make the most sense for your store. So for the bookshelf, that's Instagram. We are a very visual store. When you walk in, the store is very, I hope, visually and aesthetically pleasing. And so Instagram is a great platform for that because it's very visual. We're okay at Facebook. So we're great, I hope, at Instagram. We're okay at Facebook. We're terrible at Twitter. And that's okay, because some stores I know and love and follow are the opposite. Like, they're great at Twitter, and that's where they shine. So I think when you're looking at social media, evaluate which ones make the most sense, which platforms make the most sense for your store, because we can't do everything. Like, especially in 2020, we can't do everything.
And I'll sort of add a third layer, which is that, you know, I prefer Instagram for our store, which is something of a personal preference. And I don't really like to spend too much time on Facebook. But in our town, in our community, people still use Facebook a lot. And we do host author events in the store, and people find them on Facebook.
Yeah.
Very consistently. And so in spite of my not wanting to use it so much personally, it is tried and true for now. It's not the foundation of everything that we do. Our newsletter plays a bigger role in being the really the primary way that we share information. But Facebook is undeniably where our customers find out about what events are going on. They're not necessarily engaging with photos I might post or things like that, but they find our events there. So again, like, just, it takes time sometimes, or sometimes it's almost instantaneous. You post something and you know it's landed. And so thinking about what really matches up with how your readers are finding you.
And who your audience is. I think you make a great point. So on Instagram, for the bookshelf, a lot of the people who follow us are not local. But on Facebook, most of the people who follow us are local.
Yes.
So I think that's the other thing too, is to use different social media platforms to attract different audiences, all while maintaining, in my opinion, a consistent voice and a consistent presence. And so you're absolutely right. Like, for us, Facebook is not my personal favorite platform, but it is absolutely where local people hear about what we're doing. And then Instagram is where our faraway people hear about what we're doing, more or less. That's kind of where the dividing line is.
Yeah, I agree. So, you know, a lot of this is the landscape changes constantly, right? Hello, Reels, Instagram.
I was going to say,
TikTok.
you don't have to do Reels, everybody. It's okay.
But I mean, do you have any like funny, humbling examples of flops that have really given you something to chew on or learn from? And I didn't.
No, this is great, because I think the bookshelf, and I think anybody who is a bookseller, but really an owner or manager who's watching this probably can attest. Like, I used to be a perfectionist, and then I owned a bookstore. And so it's really more about like throwing the spaghetti noodle on the wall and seeing what sticks. And so sometimes things don't. And so for us, the podcast stuck, but it takes a lot of time. Like, it took really years for From the Front Porch to be what it is today. I mean, years.
Mm-hmm.
And one example, I think, and we can talk about this, one resource I think a lot of people do have at their disposal, probably without even realizing it, is their staff, right? So I have had staffers who are great at hand lettering or staffers who are great at design, and we've utilized their skills and abilities. For a while, we had a staffer who was great at YouTube, and so she asked to set up a YouTube channel for the bookshelf, and she did a few videos, and they were really cute and fun. And as soon as her tenure at the bookshelf ended, like she went to grad school or something, that platform died. Like because I cannot maintain a YouTube channel. I don't have the bandwidth for it. I don't know that I have the personality for it. Like this, she was great at it, but once she was gone, there was nobody to step in and fill those shoes. So when I think about failures, I think about things that just maybe didn't have the lasting appeal. It doesn't mean they were a failure in the moment, but they didn't maybe have, they didn't have the support they needed to continue.
Yeah, to be sustainable.
Yeah, to be sustainable, which is a key word the bookshelf is always thinking about, is sustainability. And then trying things, like I said, throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what works. So we don't do Instagram TV. Like it's something at first I was like, oh, we could take what we were doing on YouTube and do it on IGTV. No, no, we cannot do that. Or maybe I think about virtual events, particularly at the beginning of all this, but even now, still, while it's still happening, we thought virtual story times every Saturday, which I think your store does really well. But we did 2, and then we were like, no, we can't do this. So I just want to let people know it's okay to try things and then to like reevaluate and decide, you know what, I don't have the time, energy, or resources for this particular thing. So those are the things that come to mind.
What signal did you get to stick with from the Front Porch podcast? Because that's just a huge commitment, and you thousands of hours have you put into it over the years?
Yeah.
And how did you know when it wasn't, we didn't have the numbers necessarily?
Yeah, we definitely did not have the numbers initially. I think this week will be episode 290 of From the Front Porch. And I think what I decided early on, this was From the Front Porch, to be very clear and fair, was actually an idea from the previous bookshelf owner. And again, she encouraged me to start it to introduce myself to Thomasville. That original mission failed. But I kept doing it because I liked it. And I think sometimes we forget, as store owners, managers, we get bogged down in the minutia or the hard work that running a store is. But I think sometimes it's okay for your job to be fun, and sometimes it's okay to do what you like, and the audience, I do think, will follow. And so From the Front Porch started slow. We did bi-weekly episodes, and then I, as a podcast listener, was like, as a listener, I like consistency. I like no more than 45-minute episodes. I just made a list of what do I like in a podcast. And then I just decided I'm going to give it a year. And so this was after the initial probably year or 6 months I had been doing it. I'm going to give it another year, see if it really takes off, see if it can become a viable source of income and profit for the bookstore. And then I'll reevaluate. So setting up goals, I think, for yourself and guidelines. I'm going to try Reels for a season. I'm going to try it for the holiday season and see if it works. I'm going to try virtual story time for the summer and see if it works. So I set myself a goal of let's try this for a period of time and see if it grows. And in that time, I extended invitations to different podcasters I liked and cross-pollinated to kind of grow the boundaries of the store. I think of Ann Bogle from What Should I Read Next, who you know. I think about the Popcast with Knox and Jamie. These are people's podcasts that I already liked, I already listened to, and so I reached out to them and cross-pollinated. And then From the Front Porch really started to take off and became now, it is, you're right. You're probably right. Thousands of hours of work. And it is still a lot of work, and not every week do I really want to do it. But it has now become a viable marketing tool and a source of profit and income for the bookshelf.
Well, I was going to follow up with 2 questions, because this is not a session on podcasting, right. But if you think in terms of the time you've invested, and then the follow-up is, whether you're investing in a podcast or a newsletter or whatever form of marketing that you've decided to commit to, what's the nitty gritty? What's the payoff? Like, how are you, you spend all this time and a lot of it's about building community, but what does make it financially sustainable? How do you turn that into, book sales or ticket sales or things like that? Yeah. And I was just going to point out, like, reaching out to other people in podcasting, other people on social media, like, is, a $0. I mean, you've put a whole lot of time into this podcast, but is a $0 way of growing, just to sort of add that to the answer to our question of, shoestring marketing.
Yes. Finding partners is key. And we may talk about this later, but like finding partners who you also can help. So From the Front Porch was really a bit of a charity case, like me kind of extending the invitation to have somebody on as a guest, or in one case, like with Knox and Jamie, occasionally they will highlight books. So I didn't even mention From the Front Porch. I really just said, hey, instead of mentioning Amazon, would you be interested in occasionally mentioning the bookshelf? I'm a loyal listener of yours. Like, I'll give you 10% of the profits from the books, whatever. So there are different ways to partner. But I think it's partnering. And then I think it's asking yourself, what is a way, so this is fun, like the podcast is fun, hard work, but fun, but what's a way to kind of monetize it? And I think about newsletters. We also have a weekly newsletter that is pretty consistent, and linking your books. If you're a small store that utilizes Bookshop, I think that's a great way to direct people to Libro FM. Linking in your newsletter, for us, linking in the podcast, all the books we talk about, like here's where you find them, so that you're eliminating as much work as possible for the consumer. So they're reading your newsletter on their phone, they can tap over to your Bookshop page or to your actual store website and purchase. And I think that's what really helped the podcast. Again, didn't see a ton of that ROI, return on investment, right away. But I'll tell you that when 2020 came to pass and it was necessary to pivot, we were a store that was doing 80% of our sales in store, 20% online. And that has really almost completely flipped in 2020 to be 70% of our store profit and business is happening online, and 30% is now happening in store. And that pivot would not have been possible without the background work of the consistency of the podcast, and linking to the books we talk about. Newsletter, Instagram, like building a platform, building a reliable, just like you do in person. Like, I think independent bookstores are so good at this in their in-person communities, building a consistent audience, reaching out to them on a regular basis, but thinking outside the box and also extending that to the internet. I think especially in 2020 is key.
And I will say, I'm sure a lot of you have read all about social media, but there is also some element of this too, where you do want to invest in something that belongs to you and not something that belongs to Facebook or like Instagram. Like you shouldn't necessarily put all your eggs in the social media basket. Like some part of it, like you need to own your
content
and your content and that sort of thing. Just as a like caution. Okay, so I'm going to give you this first question out of the chat, because I feel like it pulls together some of the questions I've asked with some real concrete, a real concrete answer.
Okay.
Camille asks, please give an example of how you have built consistency in your print materials, your store atmosphere, your podcast, etc. So I'd say Instagram. What are the threads that tie them all together? And then how do you get that? I mean, how do you make that happen without spending a fortune?
Okay.
She didn't say that. I added that.
No, Camille, this is a great question. So I put this slide up. So for us, just practically nitty gritty, we have a style guide, and don't let the name scare you. Like, it's literally just a 1-page Google Doc where I shared with my staff. I see a typo in this slide, where I share with the staff the fonts we use, the colors we use, the Instagram filter we use, the fonts we use on Instagram stories. And truly, you would be amazed, even if maybe you don't have the world's best logo. But if you are just consistent in so that your brand's colors and themes are recognizable. So for us, this is an example of a storefront drawing that my friend Lindsay did. She's a great example of a brand partnership. She owns a stationery company called Pen and Paint. I asked her to do a drawing of the bookshelf. She used her amazing talents, gifts, and abilities that I do not have to create this drawing. And then hopefully I have done the same for her by talking about her business, by stocking her stationery in our store. So it's hopefully a mutual beneficial partnership. And then that image has really spawned what we use for our subscription service. Like that blue color is like our consistent through line. I talked about white space at the beginning. Our store is open and airy, so I like our printed materials to have a lot of white space because the bookshelf is just not a nooks and cranny kind of bookstore. It's great if yours is, but that's not what the bookshelf is. So our bookmarks feature a lot of white space. Our packaging, let me click over here. Our packaging and our gift wrap all is consistent. We use colors, that touch of whimsy. Our boxes have our store picture on them. You can see in the bottom right, like that's some of our shipments. And I love that like all of those boxes are going out with the bookshelf name on them. When you come to the bookshelf and we wrap a present for you, it looks beautiful. Like that's what we want, because that's why we want you to shop with us, because we're unique and we're special and we're better than a giant big box store. But we want you to get the same experience if you never set foot in our store. So our boxes and our mailing materials all matches up. I totally think you can do this on a budget. Make no mistake, like boxes, as we have learned in 2020, like shipping materials are expensive, but raffia ribbon is not expensive. Shredded craft paper is not. Like there are ways you can kind of work around this. And then what happens is on social media, people are taking pictures of your pretty packaging, or they feel like they've gotten a Christmas present in the middle of the year. Like that's the attitude and the spirit we want to reflect. So I think having a style guide, again, not as intimidating at all as it sounds, just making a list of like what colors you're going to use, what your wrapping is going to look like, what your bookmarks are going to look like, what fonts you're going to use. I think a style guide is key, and then being consistent across the board in what you use.
Lynn asks, would you please share your style guide as an example? I don't know if that's something you can really do on the spot or.
Right. I would be more, I was going to say, I'd be more than happy to share it. Right now it has, like I was going to share it on screen, but it has all of our passwords for all of our social media channels. So I'm going to adapt it so that because I would love to share it. It's so easy to create and I'm happy to share it as a template. But you'll need to shoot me an email, which I can put my email address in the chat.
So you mentioned your basic graphic design skills at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. I did not have any. I discovered early on Canva, which is a good
tool.
Bridges that gap between skills and product. And there's a free version. You can of course always buy a Canva subscription. Are there any other tools like that that have either a very small sort of subscription fee or have free versions that you found really helpful for creating this brand?
Canva is definitely an example I was going to use. We still use Canva. You don't have to be a genius to use it, but I tried it and tried like the trial thing, and then it wound up working for me. I use Adobe, like I use Photoshop and InDesign. Again, don't let those names scare you. I did do some graphic design work in my first career, I guess. But I think that is a good tool, but Canva is a great place to start. Like I can't stress it enough. And the other thing I will say is constantly be looking for inspiration. So on my style guide, you will see when I share it with you, you'll see like, I say Instagram accounts that are our goal. And it's like Books Are Magic, Parnassus, but it's also Heyday Boutique out in, I don't even know where it is, out in Colorado, Shop Flower Wild, like stores that have nothing to do with books, but just retail spaces that do a really good job of branding. And I noticed that because I was a customer and I thought, hey, they do a really good job of putting their name, but also the spirit of their store in everything they do. So I think it's really important to look for inspiration. Is there a store that does really cute bookmark designs? Well, use that for inspiration for yourself. So I don't use Pinterest, but I would imagine Pinterest is a good place to do that if you don't get sucked down the hole. And so those are the places. And then the free resources, again, are Canva. And then I use Adobe products myself.
Aaron asks, what about tone in your captions, newsletters, etc.? Do you have a store voice?
Mm-hmm. This is a hard answer because I don't mean that the store voice is my voice. And I don't know all the time if I love that. Mm-hmm. But then I write the weekly newsletter. That's really important to me. I've delegated a lot of other things that I don't care as much about, but the newsletter I write. The podcast is my literal voice, and the voice of my staff. That's been important to incorporate our staff into that. And then right now I do our store social media. Now that's not always been the case because it's impossible to do all of those things. So when I had somebody who did our social media for us, I sat down with them and talked about what tone I wanted to use for the bookshelf. That's warm, it's welcoming, it's friendly, it is above all kind. And so there are just, again, goes back to setting your mission statement. What kind of tone do you want to approach? Who's your audience? Like the same questions, I was a journalism major in undergrad. So like the same questions I asked as a journalism major, like who's my audience? Who am I writing this for? For me, it's really important that just because we've turned our attention to online doesn't mean we've left our Thomasville customers like out in the cold. Thomasville is who we are. We are a community bookstore first. And so I want to make sure that our voice also reflects our literal community and where we reside and where our hearts are. So I'm not saying that every bookstore owner or manager needs to be the voice of their store, but partly because of From the Front Porch, that's just become the way it is for us. But I think it's having open dialogue with your staff and with your employees who work with you to let them know the mission of the store and what you're communicating. And we've had 2 different social media managers in the past several years, and they both did an awesome job. And it was a give and take. Like we had to work, like I would maybe correct a caption and say, hey, can we tweak the language a little bit here? So it was a learning process, but somebody else is entirely capable of mimicking that voice. But it's all about open communication with your staff and setting a clear mission from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's totally trainable.
Yes, totally trainable.
What vendor do you use for your shipping materials and bookmarks? Asks Daryl.
Great question, Daryl. I use a local printer for our printing materials. That was really important to me, and it was really cost effective. But for our packaging, our plain boxes, we get like everybody else from Uline, and we use Sticker Mule all the time for all kinds of things. And then our boxes, we use Pack Lane. Believe me, we used Pack Lane like in a former life, like in 2019, where we weren't shipping out as many things. In 2020, we're having to reevaluate because Pack Lane is expensive. And when we were only shipping out a certain number of boxes, that was totally fine. And it was important that our branding go out on all of our materials. Now I'm reevaluating, can we do Uline and a sticker instead of our actual printed boxes? I do love Pack Lane. I love what they do. And we're still using them for the time being, but it's just me being really honest and saying, they're pricey. So Pack Lane, and then I use a local printer for all of our printed materials. The Sticker Mule. I'm sorry, I wanted to say Sticker Mule. They're great.
We've used them too. And I know a lot of people know this, but like a rubber stamp and everything blank, like we have elbow grease and time. Yes. So my staff does a lot of the printing. In their sort of downtime for either packing or for just shopping bags and things like that.
Yes.
Liz asks, how important do you feel like branded bags and wrapping is? I have a mostly used shop whose mission is recycling and reusing. So we use mostly reused bags, but I'm wondering if I should move to branded recycled items. Someone else just recommended betterbookmailers.com for shipping supplies. And I'm going to jump in and say, like, Annie's brand is so charismatic, just from, 8 hours away. up the road in North Carolina. I love it, and it's attractive, and oh my goodness. But I can totally see, and we don't really do this. We don't really have a particularly strong brand, I will say. But like, to speak to Liz's question, like your brand could be just really offbeat. Like if you're consistently offbeat, I think that could be incredibly charming.
Yeah.
And appealing. So what do you think about the answer to this question?
Okay, well, first of all, I think part of your brand is recycling and reusing things. Like that's part of your brand. For the bookshelf, wrapping and walking out of there with a bag with our stamp on it is important because of where we're located. So Thomasville is in a very touristy, walkable area. Other stores around me do beautiful wrapping. So like I'm in delightful communion and competition with my neighbors. I have to have beautiful wrapping so that people want to shop at the bookshelf when the holidays roll around or when their kids' birthday parties are happening. But Adah, your example of like, we stamp our bags, like we rubber stamp all of our presents are just wrapped in brown paper. And then the ribbon is what's cute. Like, I think embracing the recycling portion, like the mission to recycle and reuse, embracing that, making it a part of your brand, I think is crucial. And people would choose to shop with you because they know that about you. But I also think a rubber stamp with your name on it doesn't do any harm. It can only help, I would think.
Agree. Rebecca asks, I'm just going to read this out loud. Rebecca replies to Liz. I went to a music festival a while ago and they had t-shirts that had been sourced from a thrift store, screen printed with a logo. Mugs were thrift store mugs that had a sticker on it. It was awesome. And I've stolen that idea in multiple places. You could do the same thing with stamps. Yeah. Again, echoing this idea that like, if you have the materials and they fit with your voice and your mission and all of that, then like I would adore being a part of that reading community. And I think that's what this is all about, right? This is like finding the people, you know, if you build it, they will come, you know, like it doesn't have to.
No. And look, nobody wants every independent bookstore to look exactly the same. Like that's not the point of our industry and what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Like I want to go to Main Street Books and sense Adah and Jessica and all the people who work there. I want you to come to the bookshelf and sense Annie and Olivia and all the people who work at the bookshelf. And get a sense of Davidson and get a sense of Thomasville. Like it should reflect, it should be unique. It shouldn't look just like everybody else's. So I think that's important too.
I'll throw in like at the when we first started, we incorporated this little tiny silhouette of a gnome in our logo, which was just a streetscape that sort of played on the buildings as books on a bookshelf. And the gnome really came from our neighbor who's not even there anymore, but Tom Clark gnomes was this phenomenon. You could find them everywhere, including Cracker Barrels. And, they were a thing in the 90s. The shop, the studio is right down the block from us. And so Tom Clark gnomes is like this, phenomenon in our little town. And so, we have, little Tom Clark gnomes hidden all over the store. It's in our, logo. We'll occasionally do sort of gnome theme. You don't look at our Instagram and know that we're gnomes necessarily, but like that's a quirky little thing that we decided to sort of commit to early on.
Look, and when you go to your website is great, by the way. Like when you go to your website, that gnome is so cute and shows up, and it does feel like a little scavenger hunt. When you're like clicking through your pictures, you see the gnome pop up. I think that's super smart.
Love a scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's all the questions we've got in our chat.
Okay. I was just going to look at my notes to see. Okay. I'm just going to throw out a couple of tips. Yeah. So my first one is to ask yourself and your staff what you want the store to say and what it's already saying. You may have a mission statement and just not know it. You may just not have written it down yet. The second thing, look at your own circle for artists and designers. And that could be on your staff. Like at one point in time, we had a graphic designer literally on our staff. And so for a season at the store, she incorporated our colors, but she designed all of our bookmarks for a season. I I have a friend who's an artist, and she, for the past year and a half, has done all of our t-shirt designs using this like hand lettering that matches the hand lettering in our store. But like I'm helping her hopefully grow her brand, and then she is utilizing her skills and abilities to help me with mine. So look in your circle. Maybe you're in a university town and you have students at your disposal. Maybe somebody on your staff is really talented. Maybe you have a friend who's trying to grow her stationery brand. So look in your circle for people who have different gifts and abilities than you, because I could never have drawn our storefront. Lindsay did that. Evaluate what you do well or want to do well, and then get rid of the rest. Like, I just really believe it. Like, you are not meant to have to do everything. The bookshelf doesn't have to be great at Twitter. It's fine. It bothered me at first, and now it doesn't bother me anymore.
And can I jump in really quick and add to that? We haven't talked about this, but so, you know, Annie has a big listenership, a big social media following. She does a lot of online sales, and and you have to sort of look and read between the lines. But Annie doesn't necessarily host a lot of authors coming in from out of town on tours, right?
That's right.
We're a little bit closer, you know, to an airport, and we're in a college town, and we do more of that. But Annie doesn't, and tell us a little, just like quickly about that journey.
Yeah, I do just want to quickly, before people have to leave, I do want to say, like, the bookshelf doesn't do certain things. And Author Events is a great example. We're in a small town near no interstate, no airport. So for me, a podcast where I can host with my staff members is great and useful. And events where there are authors are very rarely well attended. And so we have really limited author events. Now we're doing some virtual ones, but we have limited that because we know that's just not what Thomasville is interested in. Story time, Thomasville is interested in. So I think it's really important to evaluate your community and what they want and what you are capable of and what makes sense for your store.
And you know, when the rubber hits the road, events of various kinds, authors or authorless, are marketing. I mean, that's part of
your brand.
There are lots of things, but they are part of your brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. I think that's all the time we have. I feel like we were supposed to be done here at 4:15. So thank you guys for attending. My email, oh my gosh, my computer is being weird, but my email is Annie, ANNIE @bookshelfthomasville.com, or Google the bookshelf in Thomasville. You can find my email address. And I'm happy to share the style guide with you. And if you have any questions, happy to help as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Bye.
Bye.